Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring a concept
Hmm.
that I think we all think we understand,
Yeah.
freedom. But we're looking at it through a specific lens,
Yeah.
the Black perspective in America.
Interesting.
And let me tell you,
Yeah.
getting into these sources,
Yeah.
I was struck by how much my own definition
Oh, wow.
of freedom needed expanding.
Yeah, it's one of those concepts that you think is simple,
Yeah.
but then you realize it's so much more complicated, especially when you start looking at history and
Yeah.
and the lived experiences of, Black Americans in particular.
That's exactly why we're turning to some really powerful voices from history.
Okay.
Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois,
Oh, yeah, great thinkers.
and Phillis Wheatley.
Interesting.
We've got excerpts from Douglass's 4th of July speech,
Hmm.
Du Bois' work of our spiritual strivings,
Yeah.
and Wheatley's poem on being brought from Africa to America.
That's quite a range of voices.
I'm so curious, what about these particular sources grabbed your attention?
I think it's fascinating to see how each author, comes from such a distinct background.
Right.
Douglass, a former slave,
Yeah.
Bois, a scholar,
Right?
and Wheatley, a poet. And how those experiences so profoundly shaped their perspectives on freedom.
Yeah.
It's not just some, abstract ideal for them. It's
Wow.
deeply personal and connected to their lived reality.
One thing that really jumped out at me
Yeah.
from these texts was this idea that simply being legally free
Okay.
isn't the same as actually experiencing freedom.
That's a crucial point. And
Right.
and Dubois really eloquently describes this, right?
Yeah.
He says freedom is an unattained ideal.
Right.
Emancipation was a huge step, of course,
Hmm.
but it didn't magically erase all the barriers
Yeah.
that were facing Black Americans.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like thinking you can bake a cake with just flour. You need all the other ingredients, the eggs, the sugar, the baking powder,
That's a great analogy.
to make it work.
Yeah, and Dubois argues that true freedom requires what he calls a tripartite model:
Okay.
work, culture, and liberty.
And these
And each of these were systematically denied to Black Americans after emancipation.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah.
What did those denials look like in practice?
We'll take work, for instance. Even after slavery, Black people were largely relegated
Yeah.
to low-paying, menial jobs,
Right.
often trapped in sharecropping systems that kept them
Right.
economically dependent. And then there's culture.
Yeah.
Access to education was limited, and Black cultural expression was often stifled or
Yeah.
appropriated. And when it came to liberty,
Yeah.
Jim Crow laws severely restricted their movement and political participation.
It's really eye-opening to see how these different aspects of freedom were
Yeah.
systematically
Yeah.
denied.
Yeah.
And then you have Douglass delivering this
Oh, yeah.
scathing critique of American freedom on Independence Day.
Yeah. Bold move.
Talk about bold.
Yeah.
What do you think he was trying to achieve with that speech?
I think Douglass masterfully exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of American society.
Okay.
You have white Americans celebrating freedom while
Uh-huh.
a significant portion of the population is still enduring oppression.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from calling them out on it.
He certainly doesn't.
Yeah.
That quote where he says, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim."
Wow.
That's just powerful.
It's a powerful statement.
It makes you think, have you ever been in a situation
Yeah.
where a celebration felt out of sync with your own reality?
It's definitely a question worth pondering.
And it really drives home the point that freedom
Yeah,
is subjective and experienced differently by each individual.
absolutely.
Absolutely. And then we have Phillis Wheatley,
Hmm.
who adds another layer to this discussion. It's interesting that her poem, while not explicitly about freedom,
Yeah.
still speaks volumes about her own journey towards it.
Right. I think what's fascinating is that Wheatley found a kind of spiritual freedom and empowerment through her conversion to Christianity,
Yeah.
but it's so intertwined with her experience as a Black woman in a society
Right.
that viewed her as inherently inferior.
She even talks about how people see her with a scornful eye,
Yeah.
referring to herself as black as Cain.
It's a powerful image.
And remember, this is the 18th century.
Right.
It's incredible that she's even daring to write,
Yeah.
let alone express these complex ideas.
Absolutely. Her very act of writing is a form of rebellion,
Right.
of intellectual freedom.
Yeah.
And within her poem, there's this subtle but powerful argument
Yeah.
for racial inclusion within the Christian faith.
Right.
It's like she's carving out a space for herself and
Yeah.
challenging the prevailing views of her time.
So we have spiritual freedom, intellectual freedom, and this fight for political and social power.
Hmm.
It's clear that achieving genuine freedom for Black Americans requires more than just one approach.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process, a struggle that continues to this day.
Which brings us to the present.
And as we think about the legacy of these ideas,
Yeah.
we have to acknowledge that the fight for freedom is far from over.
Mm.
The echoes of these historical struggles
Right.
are still very much present
Yeah.
in the challenges facing Black Americans today.
It's like Douglass, Du Bois, and Wheatley are handing us a torch, urging us to carry it forward. But what does that look like in a 21st century context?
Right.
What are some of the specific ways these historical insights can inform our understanding of the ongoing struggle for racial justice?
Well, Douglass's emphasis on challenging the status quo
Yep.
and laying bare the hypocrisy of American society is incredibly relevant. You know, he
Yeah.
urges us to lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, basically calling for a constant confrontation between ideals and reality.
It's about not letting ourselves get complacent, right?
Exactly.
Or accepting things as they are.
Yeah.
And that connects so powerfully to Du Bois' concept of the tripartite model. He wasn't just talking about theoretical concepts. He was laying out a roadmap for achieving genuine equality.
Exactly. And that roadmap requires action on multiple fronts.
Like what?
Well, we still see disparities in work and economic opportunity,
Right.
access to quality education and healthcare,
Yeah,
and
right.
political representation.
Right.
Addressing these systemic issues is crucial for moving towards true freedom.
And then there's Wheatley,
Yeah.
who reminds us that even in the face of immense oppression,
Right.
individuals can find ways to assert their humanity and their right to be heard.
Her poetry was a form of resistance,
Yeah.
a way of reclaiming her own narrative.
It strikes me that all three authors
Yeah.
emphasize the importance of knowledge and understanding as tools for liberation. Douglass calls for people to educate themselves about the realities of oppression.
Right.
Du Bois stresses the power of education and intellectual development.
Right.
And Wheatley demonstrates the transformative power of literacy and self-expression.
It's a reminder that the fight for freedom isn't just about changing laws or policies. It's about changing minds and hearts.
So how do we take these historical insights
Yeah.
and translate them into meaningful action in our own lives?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that the pursuit of freedom is not a spectator sport.
Okay.
It requires active participation, a willingness to get uncomfortable, and a commitment to challenging injustice wherever we see it.
It's also about understanding that freedom is not a zero-sum game, right?
Absolutely.
The liberation of one group doesn't come at the expense of another.
That's an important point.
True freedom requires a collective effort, a commitment to building a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
And that's a vision worth striving for.
Yeah.
It's a vision that requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. This has been such an eye-opening conversation,
It has.
but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
What are some of the questions that have lingered for you as you've reflected on these ideas?
You know, it's interesting to consider how the meaning of freedom itself continues to evolve.
Right.
I mean, we've talked about the historical context,
Right.
but what does freedom look like in the future?
That's a great point.
Especially given all the changes, like
Yeah.
the rapid advancements in technology and
Yeah.
the changing dynamics of society.
That's a great point. Technology has the potential to be both
Yeah.
a tool for liberation
Right.
and a means of control. Right?
Exactly.
It can connect people,
Yeah.
amplify marginalized voices, and facilitate social movements,
Right.
but it can also reinforce existing inequalities,
Absolutely.
spread misinformation,
Yeah.
and be used for surveillance and oppression.
We need to be really mindful of how technology is shaping our understanding of freedom and what role it plays in either advancing or hindering progress.
It's a responsibility that falls on all of us, individuals, communities, and policymakers.
Yeah.
We need to be critically engaging with technology, right? Promoting digital literacy
Absolutely.
and advocating for ethical and equitable development in use.
And as we think about the future of freedom,
Yeah.
we can't overlook the importance of intersectionality. You know, it's about recognizing that Various forms of oppression,
Right.
racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and others
Yeah.
are all interconnected
Right.
and can't be addressed in isolation.
The fight for freedom is not about
Yeah.
achieving equality for one group at the expense of another.
Right.
It's about dismantling systems of oppression that impact all marginalized communities.
Absolutely.
It requires building coalitions, amplifying each other's voices, and working together to create a world where everyone can truly thrive.
And that brings us back to the core message of Douglass, Du Bois, and Wheatley.
Yeah.
The pursuit of freedom is a continuous journey, not a destination.
Right.
It requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge injustice wherever we see it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with this.
Okay.
What will you do to carry the torch of freedom forward? How will you contribute to creating a more just and equitable world for all?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a future where everyone can experience the full meaning of freedom.
Well said.
It's been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
Until next time.
Stay curious and keep diving deep.